Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of New Product Innovation. I'm Saif Abdelghani, Product Innovation Expert, podcaster, and PDMA Egypt Chapter Leader. Welcome everyone to a new episode of New Product Innovation Podcast. Today we have two special hosts, Michael Hyzy and Bret Wardle. Michael is a distinguished product strategist, senior principal consultant at Dotry Business Solutions, and Bret is a product leader with over 15 years of experience in game and software management and adjunct instructor in Limont College of Computer Science. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about an amazing topic, so gamification in product management, and this is a great opportunity because you guys just released your new book, which is quite amazing. I've seen the outline. It's quite very nice. And I think first we want to understand what do we mean actually by gamification so that the audience can have some flavor of what the book is going to present.
Yeah, so in short, gamification is really just using game mechanics, game psychology in non-game context. Like in its simplest form, that's it. And sometimes what comes to mind immediately is points, badges, leaderboards, but it's significantly more than that. It's using that psychology and using the way that people interact with fun and interact with games differently than they do with software to try to make software more enjoyable, more exciting, a little bit stickier, and increase engagement and really change any of the KPIs that we normally would look to change in our products that we design.
Well, that's quite interesting. So if we're taking it from a historical context, right? So how does games evolve? And that evolution, how did it enter into the software product management and into product management overall?
Yeah. I mean, really, like games are incredibly old. Sometimes we don't realize it, but games are 4,500 years old. Like we have the game of we found dice, like archaeological records of dice and playing cards, that same type of age. So games are forever old. They're as old as civilization is itself. And we enjoy them. We play them. We socialize around them. And a lot of that psychology is baked in. And it wasn't until obviously software came along, we started implementing it there, but you even see it in things like S&H green stamps in the 30s through 70s, Boy Scouting, Girl Scouting of America. They use the merit badge system, and those are all game type contexts. Those are the things that you would see in board games and card games from over 1,000 years old. And so it's kind of creeped its way in and gone a little bit unnoticed, but in our software, like we have a lot of these cues. It's really just starting to understand them better and know when we can use different types of mechanics to change the different types of KPIs that we want to enact change on.
That's actually quite very interesting. So if we're looking at gamification, how does it stand today? And when you're talking mainly, it's mainly software product management, and we're going to go into that part in the later stage, but how has it been accepted by different industries, especially in the software product management, so fintech and other specific subcategories as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times we interact with gamification and we don't even know it. We're all on social media platforms, right? Like the like button and sharing and these like social cues, these were written about in the 80s in the book Influence, right? And it's, Facebook, MySpace, the initial social media platforms took those concepts of social interaction and digitized them, right? We like getting liked for something in person. It's like, oh, Mike, I like that you did that, right? On Facebook, I see the little clicks and they add up, right? And now there's a point system that I could say like, oh, I got 106 likes on this, right? I must be doing something great on social media, right? Like, so that's part of gamification that we may not think of that as gamification, but it is in our everyday lives on social media. Now, I would say the best example and possibly overused example of gamification is Duolingo, right? If anyone's ever tried to learn a language, Duolingo has mastered the art of gamification, right? They take something that is incredibly difficult to do and they make it fun. And then again, that is at the core of gamification, right? Why do we use game mechanics for non-game situations? To make it fun. And Duolingo did that in a very structured and engaging way that allowed millions of people across the globe to learn a new language, right? That's awesome. In the fitness industry, Nike Plus, right? Nike uses gamification. We talk about how Strava does it in our book. Being able, so if I'm on a route on my bike, I see who has the fastest time on that route while I'm biking it, and that usually gets me, a little kick to try to beat their time, which never happens, but I do try, right? So it encourages, some extra healthy behavior. And we talk about a lot of the bad ways gamification can be used in the book too, right? Like, gambling, integrating like sports betting at professional sports clubs, the psychology behind how casinos are designed, right? Like there's kind of good and evil with gamification, and we tend to focus on here are all the good things that you could do with it. Because it really is in every aspect of our lives. Starbucks, right? They use points to get free coffee, but then there's also challenges. They're like, hey, if you buy 3 of these drinks this week, we're going to give you a 4th one for free, right? So they do a really good mixing up the different ways. So
Actually, this is inspired the point that recently LinkedIn launched the collaborative articles you've seen, and they are trying to put that kind of badge as an incentive for everyone to try and add more information. So it becomes really something that we see every day, and businesses are trying to adopt that in a very good way to grow their business, also grow the community as well. So if we're talking about the ethics part specifically, so how do we take the ethics and the planning and the balance part? Because if gamification is used in the wrong way, it can have severe consequences, not just on the user, but also on the business.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, one of the things I kind of use to differentiate that like good and bad ethics and gamification is I go back to like doctors have the Hippocratic oath, right? Like, and as a designer, as a product leader, like we're more or less the same. That first rule, first do no harm, is like the first part of the Hippocratic oath. Like to me, that's where gamification stands. Like start by doing no harm. Do nothing that should cause harm to your user. Like don't put them in a situation that could, I mean, obviously, we don't want to endanger people, but don't put them in a situation where they could become addicted to a product or they could put themselves where they're harming themselves or others, and use positive reinforcement. Like there's very, very few instances in gamification and product design where negative reinforcement is the best route to go. It's almost always positive reinforcement. And so that's kind of the thing that keeps me clear is don't use anything that puts them into harm's way or into a situation where they're not doing something that is in their best interest as the user.
yeah, and just
That's
to add
quite
on
good.
to that, like
Yeah,
from a
go ahead,
product
go ahead, Mike.
perspective, we write about accessibility when you're designing a game. Make sure everyone could use it, right? And like, people with different disabilities. Did you incorporate that into your game design, right? You don't want to, leave people out of the gamified experience. So if you're going to do something as you're designing game mechanics, think about how different people from different backgrounds are going to be able to use that.
So, if you have one advice or one principle that every business should keep in mind when starting gamification, what would that be?
I mean, I think we preach this in our presentations, right? It's like, don't set out to go do gamification. Gamification is not something you do. Gamification is a tool to get to your goal. So when you're starting with gamification, first identify what is the business goal that you're trying to accomplish, and then how can gamification help you get there. If you set out just to do gamification, it's misguided, and you're going to look back and say like, what are we really getting out of this? Nothing. Well, yeah, because it wasn't tied to a larger goal.
Yep, exactly what Mike said. Like, know the KPIs you want to affect, and also know your users. Like, if you understand your users, there's different types of mechanics that work better for different types of users. So go and do that research. Like the Hexad framework is a great framework for understanding the types of players or types of users you have. Do some research into that. Try to understand, are people achievers? Are they philosophers? Are they socializers? And build mechanics around the type of users that you have.
That's quite interesting. So when we talked at the beginning, it was mainly software, right? So if we're trying now to differentiate between digital products and physical products, how would you see gamification going into both directions?
So I've worked in the international fitness manufacturing community before. So the software that I was responsible was integrated in your phone, was integrated in the treadmills and ellipticals and the gym management software system. So I saw that, marriage of software and hardware for the overall experience of the user, right? The gym goer, the gym manager, etc. And I think that, I just shared an article that Peloton did. Like, Peloton is very successful gamifying its programming in group settings, right? As it should be, because there are some industries that are more ripe for gamification than others. Fitness is definitely almost a free-for-all with gamification, right? There's so many different options, different types of users, different things that you come up with to really be successful. So, our book is mostly focused on how to integrate gamification into your digital products, but a lot of the core of what we talk about and discuss and try to educate the reader on can be applied to hardware products. It's just kind of a different life cycle and I mean, I find it hard to see how many physical products don't have a digital component now, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
Everything,
No,
those worlds are converging. Like everything, just like you said, like Peloton is just as much software as it is hardware. And you see like Dribble Up. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dribble Up product, but it's like basketball, soccer, where you have a physical ball, but you're playing in front of an iPad and it's showing you like, oh, kick the ball to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. And you're mixing those two worlds. And I see that more and more, like more and more, even if it's a physical product, technology is everywhere. Even physical
right.
products these days all have some piece of technology, even if it's just like an NFC chip integrated in it or something like that. It's those worlds are colliding.
Yes, very interesting. So, if we're now trying to discuss gamification aspect as an enabler, as you just mentioned, that it's a tool. You don't do gamification for the sake of gamification. You use it as a tool to grow the business. So, how do we use gamification to increase user engagement, and what are the benefits of using that? The tangible benefits that consumer can actually feel.
Yeah, it for me it boils down to like when it's all said and done, the sense of flow. Like if you're familiar with the concept of flow by the like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, like that's the core of gamification, right? Like we can sit and get lost in a game for hours. Like you'll start playing and then 5 hours later you're like, oh man, I needed to go to bed like 4 hours ago. We
Yeah.
don't do that with Word. Like I don't sit down with Excel or Word and start typing and then go, oh man, I got lost in this spreadsheet and I really should have gone to bed. Like that's what if we did? What if the products we use for work, the products we use for productivity had that same sense where you just got lost in your work. You entered that state of flow where the rest of the world kind of faded away and you were using that product. And gamification can help aid in that. It can help you start to see like, okay, we have these little checkpoints along the way. So it builds a sense of process where I can start to move myself along. And it's not looking at this daunting, like, oh, I have this giant spreadsheet I've got to accomplish. And all of these things along the way in those the form of games. That's why games you get lost. It's not, you don't look at the end boss of a game right away and go, oh, this is going to be a 20-hour investment. They're rewarding you every 5 minutes or quicker than that, and so it doesn't seem as daunting. So 5 minutes turns into 12 minutes, turns into an hour, turns into 2 hours. And I mean that's ultimately the crux of it. That's the tangible part of gamification, is where we build this productivity, and the engagement just kind of comes baked in. If we're having fun, we're enjoying ourselves and the barriers are removed, that sense of flow can come, and that's a tangible piece of engagement that we can take away.
Well, that's quite amazing. So this actually describes the nudges and desired behavior. So as you mentioned, right, gamification can lead that you can stay up doing the game or trying work on the product for several hours, without just realizing this, which drives a very common question, right? So this can be a common pitfall that when you do gamification of digital or physical products, companies have to avoid that because you want to drive some sort of acceptable behavior. Otherwise, it becomes more of an addiction.
Yeah, and I think that whole nudge theory, right, that was popularized by Richard Thaler. Like I read that book probably in 2010 when I was just breaking into the startup scene in Chicago, and that completely changed the way I look at developing a business, developing a product, with this whole this concept of choice architecture, right? So when you're designing your gamified platform, right, you have to think about your user interface, your game mechanics, the rewards, right? You have all these different tools in here that you're using to design not just the architecture of the digital product, but the choice architecture through the journey that you want to take their user through, right? Like this aligns really well with being skilled to do a user journey map, right? What's the decision tree that you're taking the users from, and where are you putting those rewards and games and actions to get them towards like the desired effect? And back to Bret's comment earlier, right? Do no harm, right? The effects and the choices you want them to make should be a benefit to the user and the business. Example I'll give, I worked last year on a pharmaceutical app for a healthcare company. And it was, a choice architecture throughout the digital experience, because at the end of the day, you want the user to adhere to their medication, right? So the positive on the user side, they are taking their medication when and how they should. They are living a healthier life. The benefit to the insurance company is they spend less time in the hospital, right? And there's a lower cost to the insurance company. So that is a win win-win situation where you are framing the choice architecture to work for the user and for the business. I could go on about Nudge, that book, and all the concepts of behavioral economics for another hour and a half. So I'm going to leave that right there and let you and see where we go.
Yeah, yeah. So when I tried to understand more about gamification the last couple of days, actually, because this was quite an interesting topic, so I saw lots of different frameworks, octalysis, hook model. So if you want to get the audience to understand more about this kind of frameworks, how can we explain it?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a ton of them out there. Like there's a ton of frameworks. There's a ton of ways of looking at it, and slicing it up. The Octalysis framework is actually one of my favorite. Like I like the way that Yukai, he really focuses on the game aspect of gamification. Some of the frameworks look at the psychology. Some of them break up mechanics. Like Yukai, when it's all said and done, like is a gamer. Like he was born out of games. I mean, he was addicted to games at one point, and he understands those mechanics. He understands the psychology. And so I really like the way that he's broken it down into the sort of, I mean, the octalysis, the
Yeah.
octagon that he has. And I think it works well. And I think the way that he presents it is also unique and fun. It's a little bit different than the others. Like most of them come from a book or something that kind of started it. He just kind of started with YouTube videos and just kind of him wandering around cities talking about gamification. And it creates this sort of fun atmosphere. But when it's all said and done, the psychology behind it is sound. Like it's like I come from a game design background, and those are the same psychological cues that we use in designing games in addition to software. And so the Octalysis, I think does a really good job. I mean, amongst a number of others that are great, but I think Yukai does a great job of breaking down the specific mechanics, how to apply them, and how you can kind of grow that octagon in the direction you need.
Yeah, and just to from the hooked model, right? Like from near, like that's what I used when I was wireframing the fitness experience, right? I read his book when it came out, and you think about things like we always think like external triggers as product designers, right? Email, notification, blah blah blah. But his dive into like what are the internal triggers? What are the emotions that the exerciser is feeling, right? Like boredom, anxiety, need for a social connection. That kind of expands your design mindset, right? And now you're thinking the gym experience, social connection, group fitness, right? Boredom, anxiety. How do you turn those triggers into action, right? And a lot of time for gym management soft, like they want to get you into the gym. They want to get you using the equipment. They want to get you exercising because that's what the KPIs are, right? As Bret talked about, like what's your goal that you're trying to enact? And then, variable rewards, like we'll go into leaderboards a little bit later, but there's the social awards, right? Like, hey, I got this badge, like I could lift 200 pounds, bro, right? Like you have so much material to work with different rewards and different types of rewards to keep it fresh and amusing. So I just want to end on the fact that Yukai and Nir both endorsed our book. Like, can you imagine how great that made us feel, right? As we both looked up to each of them, and we've literally used their thought leadership to build incredible products in our careers. And not only did they read our book, but they recommended it. Like that, I think that was like the biggest win that we could hope for out of this.
That's a great accomplishment. Congratulations, guys. So if we're looking at this, so the psychological aspect part plays a great deal inside the gamification aspect. So designing a reward system, having that kind of social engagement, and the game psychology aspect. So if you're looking now at the innovation happening in the gamification trend, I think in the last few years we've been seeing companies applying different ways. What would you say would be the sort of a trend that you see upcoming on the horizon in terms of gamification?
I mean, now you have generative AI, and gamification takes it to the next level, like pun intended, because I mean, I've been doing research on this. I'm writing a couple articles. One of them, we're looking at how HR is using generative AI for training. Like you could create characters and thought patterns in speech for conflict training. Let's say that you have a high risk environment, like being in somewhere that's dangerous or in a restaurant that's busy. Now you could put on VR and go into a completely immersive environment in virtual reality and do your training there that doesn't affect the key aspects of the business. That's wild. We'll talk about rewards and leaderboards and how gamification at its core can't be static because then it gets boring and people leave, right? With generative AI now, like the specificity of rewards that you could give to a person, right, is and how you continually to ship them using large language models, like this is, the next decade in gamification is going to be on a different level with access to the technology that we have today.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to VR, like the AR space is absolutely crazy. Like once brands, and it's already happening, brands are starting to familiarize themselves even more and more with that mixed reality. It offers so much incentive to like go in there and like start like grabbing people's attention to certain points and placing yourself in front of them and kind of integrating you as a brand into their life. Like that's, we have these lifestyle brands, and these brands that we know and love and talk about, that's what they've done, is they've ingrained themselves into people's lifestyles. And AR has the possibility of that even tenfold, where everything you're doing as far as an activity goes is going to your Nike tracker, or Strava's just working automatically in the background and doing these kinds of things. It's a pretty exciting space that we're moving into with all of this new technology and its increase in capacity.
Yeah, I think it's if I look at it from a different landscape, right? So gamification can be utilized in order not to focus only on the product innovation aspect. So you focus on some enablers to expand your horizon, and how you try to engage that consumer psychology so that they can feel sort of accomplishment or achievement, right? And I think this is one of the things that companies have to start looking at. You don't only look at your product performance or just the ecosystem, but you start looking at the psychology of the consumer, because this is one of the most critical points that can drive the consumer to engage more with your product. So if we're looking now at gamification after we understood all this wealth of knowledge, so there should be benefits, and at the same time there should be challenges. So if we're trying to understand how the gamification increase the engagement and differentiate the products and the nudge behavior, and we've talked about this a lot, but in terms of challenges, what are the limitations we're seeing today? And how do we ensure that it doesn't harm the user experience? And at the same time, privacy part and the GDPR, the part in Europe, which is quite intensively applied now, how do you ensure that you don't overcome that you can overcome actually these kind of limitations?
So I'll jump on my soapbox about leaderboards, Brett, if you want to take the privacy part. But I mean, we do a subsection of the book just on leaderboards, because there's this like pattern of thought in industry to where you just put a leaderboard up and you've done gamification. And I've seen this so many times, from fitness to HR, all over the place. You put a leaderboard up that's static and you leave it, and like, oh, our gamification strategy didn't work. And it's like, well, you haven't updated your leaderboard in 18 months. There's people that don't even work here anymore that are on the top of the leaderboard, right? Like,
Yeah.
a leaderboard has to be dynamic. There has to be a time consideration for what is the challenge that you're trying to accomplish. What is the set of time you're giving your users to accomplish that? And, is it working or not? What's your feedback? Is everyone engaging with it? If they're not engaging with it, why? Right? Like one of the things we preach continuously, just through our thought leadership as well, is that you need to get feedback from your users on a regular basis. It's just like what any other product best practice, right? You don't just release a product into the ether and say like, all right, we launched it. Now let's go do something else. And people that do, your product's probably not successful, right? So, as with product gamification, reach back out. Hey, users, are you enjoying this? Why? Why not? Right? And continue to tweak your challenges and gamification strategy until you're hitting those KPIs that you set out to address.
Yeah, and as far as the privacy is concerned, just like you said, like that's a very real concern now. Like we live in a society of GDPR, CPPA, like all of these restrictions on privacy. And unfortunately, like part of gamification, you do need to track what users are doing. That's part of gamification. Like how many times have you done this? What have you done? What are these things? The biggest part to me, as far as privacy is concerned, is you don't necessarily need to tie that information to PII, to personal identifying information. It can be tied. I mean, games have had this for years, and it's lived under the guise of a gamer tag. Like you're actively told, like, well, don't use your real name when you're online playing games. Products can be the exact same. Like you don't have to, like as a product user, like I shouldn't have to give my name, my real birth date. Some of these things aren't information that we need. I think as product managers, sometimes we think like, oh, I want to gather it because I can use it for telemetry data or use it for usage data. But you can get all of that same data, tie it to an anonymous user where you're not tying it to any PII, any personal identifying information. And some of those privacy things go away. And the ones that don't, you simply provide opt-outs. You provide clean, easy to use opt-outs. So any user can say, hey, I do not want to do this. I do not want anything collected. Or if they did have it collected at some point, they can say, hey, please remove me from the system. And as a product designer, those are easy things for us to kind of design into the system. And if we're collecting this data, that should be forethought before we put it into the system is, hey, we're going to collect this. We need to design a way for users to remove this or ask for its removal or opt out. And if we do that, then those privacy things are alleviated to a certain extent. That's where GDPR and CPPA come in, is exactly that. Just giving users the ability to say, hey, I would like this removed, or I would like this not collected in the first place. And that's every user's right to do that in the world that we live in. And providing that is fine, because for some users, they don't want this. They don't want these things to be tracked. And just like we said earlier, like, know your user types. If you have user types that are in that boat, then consider that when you go into the gamification. And I think that helps with a lot of the privacy. But in this world, like, you're absolutely right. Like, the privacy concerns and challenges that come with it can be big. But if you just kind of design them into that forethought of what you're building, it becomes a lot easier to do it then than once you've collected this data and you're like, okay, well, now what do we do when someone wants to be removed?
I fully agree with you. So, in terms of accessibility part, so how do you make sure that the gamified experience is really accessible to all the users? And at the same time, how do you personalize this and try to make it in a sort of a personalized way for each customer in the way that he prefers it to be? Because making a generic gamification experience can sometimes deter lots of consumers. But if I find it becomes much more personalized, much more into my taste, that would get me more to engage with the product itself.
Yeah, I think first for the accessibility, there are accessibility guidelines, right? And our recommendation, we are not creating new accessibility guidelines. We are pointing the user, the reader, the developer towards these accessibility guidelines and say, follow these steps, right? And, we have a summary of it in the books, but it's like, here are the different types of situations that people will encounter, that they'll have difficulty accessing digital products. Have you thought about, vision impaired? Have you thought about audio impaired? Have you thought about speech impaired, right? Like, going through like this list of have you designed it to account for these things? And to your point, like, gamification can't be all things to all people. So with Bret's comment earlier, like talking about Hexad, right? And like knowing your personas, the type of games that they like to play, you're slicing and dicing your experience, right? You might, during your research, saying like, okay, so out of our, we're in this industry, and in this industry we have these personas that we established. Out of these personas, they're 70% likely to involve in gamification. They like strategy, RPG, whatever, right? I'm just making stuff up at this point, right? And then that, and then that's your first launch. Those are your champion users that you identify. You build the experience to them, right? And then once you have that, the feedback loop going, you've established that experience, then you start going to the next group. Okay, all right, who's at the 40%, right? Okay, it's this group that likes more action shooter type games, right? So, and they have these goals, right? So how can we start incorporating those experiences in? You go, again, this is where a lot of people fail, because they try to do all things for all people at once and no one's satisfied, to where, you really focus, like, building the experience for personas. Does this, the second iteration, does it fit? Who are you going to jump on? The champion users, right, are giving credibility to it because they're posting feedback on the App Store. They're talking about it, right? So they credentialize your product, which allows for that next wave to come in, and you continue to experiment and iterate with, incorporating different personas.
Yeah. I mean, have people using it early and often. I mean, just like Mike said, pay attention to what your users are saying. Build that in early. I mean, games do this before a release. They're having hundreds of thousands of play testers that are answering questions, and make that subset, like, make that diverse. Like, that's the one thing that games didn't do well for a really long time. And just in the last decade or so, we're introducing more of that accessibility. You're having some of those accessibility things come in and play test. Like, have someone that is hearing impaired use your product and try these out. Have someone that is vision impaired come in and use these things, and bake that into your user base and your testing session, so that the guidelines, you're designing around the guidelines, but you're also getting feedback early about the usability. And pay attention to that usability and implement change. I think that's one thing is we think like, oh, well, I'll have someone try it out. But then we don't take the feedback that we get and enact change with it. And doing that is part of gamification. Like you have to do that. You have to listen to that feedback. You have to iterate. Like gamification is an iterative process. Like it is a taking the, okay, this wasn't for me. I didn't like the way that this worked. Okay, change it up. And trying to make nothing required. Like that's the other big thing that I will say is you have those different user types. You're going to have different games for each of them. And they may not enjoy this part of the gamification, but they enjoy this part. And you've got to kind of slice the way that that works. And you've got to kind of say like, hey, none of these are required parts of the usage. They just boost engagement. If you can find one of these 3 ways that we've done, then that's acceptable to us. You don't have to enjoy all of them. We've built different paths for different types of players.
That's quite interesting. I think it's a perfect way to try to put it, that you don't need to go all in from the beginning, right? You can try to segment that kind of use and try to get more feedback and improve as you go. That's quite nice. So if we're now trying to make a balance, right, between the pros and cons of having an optimal gamification, if we're trying to list 3-4 main steps for any organization to try and implement that and try to take all the good things that you mentioned about having gamification, all the bad things you have to understand, and the limitation part, how would you flow from step A up to step B when you say, okay, I have no gamification experience at all at this point, I want to have an optimal one, and as a first start, how would that go?
Well, first step, buy our book, and then buy the books that we recommend to go with our book, and then you're set. No, but more seriousness, and Bret, let's play off of this because I've gotten this question like since we've been getting some visibility with the book release. I think first step though is we talked about goals, right? What's your goal? What are your KPIs? What do you need to accomplish? Then it's like, okay, well, how are you going to get there? Do you have personas and jobs to be done on your user base? Is this an internal thing? Survey your employees, right? What type of games do they like? Build personas in your employees. Is this a user group? What user group? What industry? And, I'll say this, like, it's not too different, but there are some different things. There are different opportunities in different industries, right? When you look at where gamification really fits, you're in education, which is, there are some different gamification tactics and strategy in education and e-learning. Healthcare, retail, and e-commerce, right? Like Bret's got a great background in that, right? He has more experience in that. Then, I have more experience in the healthcare gamification part, marketing and advertising, HR that we talked about briefly, right? Like there are different game mechanics in different things and all of that. But regardless, I would say goals and KPIs, building personas, prototype and test, feedback and adjust, right? Like if I'm paraphrasing, kind of the core of what we wrote about, but that would be my take. Bret, how about you?
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like I don't have a ton more to add there. The one thing that I always say, like it's kind of been my mantra, is anytime a product manager asks me about this and says like, oh, well, how do I understand more about this? Like pretty simple, three words: play more games. Like go to the source material. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, well, what like apps do this and whether I don't know, go play the latest Legend of Zelda, go play Starfield, go play one of these games that recently released, or go old school. Like I'll always recommend old school games to people. And so that's kind of where I tell them too. Like Mike hit the nail on the head as far as like, hey, this is what like you need to pay attention to. Like know the KPIs, know your users, iterate. Like those are the crux. And every product manager should be doing that, like regardless of gamification or not. But if you really want to understand why people love games, play them. Like you can't like talk to people about the passion that they have for games if you're not willing to dive into them and try to understand that passion. When you're trying to figure out why people love to read books, you've got to go and read books. Why people love movies, you've got to consume those medias. And so I'll always kind of tell people like, hey, if you're interested in understanding why people love games, play them. Like go and play more games.
I think this is a very interesting point because I come from the home appliance industry, and if I'm trying to think about it, again, at the end of the day, interacting with a refrigerator or a washing machine or a cooker, but you try to think this is a normal thing to interact, and having gamification there can be quite difficult. But thinking about it, no, actually trying to link this to something that consumers care about. Like today, we see everyone talking about sustainability, trying to save more energy, trying to have less material usage. So if you're actually trying to understand the consumer behavior with the appliance, and you're trying to give them sort of badges or some good notification or something to share on their social media that you have participated in, like having the result of one more planted tree in the environment, for example, that kind of things can enhance and improve their behavior when dealing with the appliances as well. And this is quite interesting. And also in the education part, as you mentioned, we find that when you have courses that are set for free but they have digital badges, people are actually going to finish the course to get the badge part. So it's more like the incentive aspect that gets users actually to finish things, because sometimes when we have things that are more of a freemium, you guys start and then, okay, maybe it's not really that much, I have other things to do. But when you have something like an end goal, which is incentivized by something like gamification, it becomes more, uh, how to say, more incentivized to finish it at the end.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example. Yesterday, Sunday, supposed to be day off, and I started this Google class about generative AI like a month ago. And I'm like, I have 2 hours left to just get this badge for my LinkedIn profile. I might as well just go do it. And I just went 2 hours reading videos, taking the test just to finish off that because I wanted the badge. Right? I'm like, I already put whatever 4 6 hours whatever into this certification, and to understand, the complexity of generative AI, right, which isn't easy unless you are a PhD mathematician, and might as well finish it. So because I want that badge. So yes, I agree with you.
That's perfect. So if we're now going more into product managers and trying to understand, so as a product manager, if we're trying to discuss how gamification can actually fit inside the toolkit, you mentioned something very interesting: play more games, right? Try and understand how the game mechanics work and how can that fit into your industry, into the product you're kind of playing. So if we want actually to try and use that as differentiation, what more can we add or give a product manager to use in his toolkit?
Well, I think you're exactly right in saying it's part of our toolkit. Like, I think that's the first step is understanding like this is just a tool to enact change in our products. Like, if we can take that step back and acknowledge that, I think that's a huge part. Like, people think, like Mike said earlier, like, you don't just enact gamification for the sake of putting gamification in our products. Like, it is a tool to influence behavior. Like, you need to know what exactly you are trying to influence. And so go in and try to understand that. Try to understand, okay, this is the KPI we want to change. How can we do that? Is this something that if we reward users in a certain way, will it enact that change? Is it that we need to have some type of guidance? Is it that they don't care about the rewards? They just don't know how to accomplish what we want them to accomplish. And so just being able to dissect and understand that, I think, is a big part of it. Because a lot of times we think, oh, gamification, well, we'll just add a leaderboard and it will make our product sticky. Like, that's not the case. Like, you need to know what it is you want to change and how to change it. It's prescriptive, right? Like, it's not something that you just apply and it just changes the things you think will
Yeah.
magically change. So that's the biggest part that I would say is like product managers just need to learn to understand, to dissect those things and say, hey, a little bit further, we need to dive into this a little bit further, just like we would with any feature. Like, we do this with all the other features we talk about in our products. It's gamification is no different. It's just a tool in your toolbox. We have these other things. Okay, well, we could solve our conversion issue with marketing, or we could solve our checkout flow by introducing a Venmo or a PayPal or something. Maybe that increases conversion. We have different tools in a toolkit. Gamification is just one of them. It's just another one that you can add to that kit. And think about it that way. Think about it as, hey, there's a lot of ways we could slice this pie. Gamification is just one of them, and in some cases it might be the best one.
Yeah. And just like to echo that. So, after working with Bret and, his experience as a video game developer, and, we're talking about, we're writing this book, like I started, his advice to me is like, really start thinking about these things when you're playing the game. And in our presentation, we have a couple different examples of games that we like, right? But now I'm playing my game, I'm like, oh, I'm in this game mechanic. Oh man, this storyline really is good, right? It's like, I played this game more I thought about too, because story is a big part of games. Right. I think a lot of people don't tie this together with gamification, right? To our points, like throwing a leaderboard, throwing some points. It's like, no, think about the best games that you've ever played. there's a compelling narrative behind them. And then some of them can shift in many different directions, right? Think of Zelda, think of Final Fantasy VII. I always use that as like one of the best stories. That's why I remember that game from my childhood, because the story was just unbelievable. And then, you get to The Witcher Wild Hunt, while your decisions dictate the storyline, right? There's hundreds of different outcomes that you could have based on the moral choices, you make as the Witcher. And then there's the side romances in the game, right? Like now I went back and I played The Witcher just to understand it. It was like, oh my God, like no wonder why this is like a 300-hour game, because all the different storylines, the open world, the different game mechanics, like, right? Like that to me, go play a game like that. God of War, incredible storyline between a father and son, right? And their trials and tribulations, like amazing storyline. It's kind of like, you have good gameplay and a good story to keep you playing that. And we bring that up a lot too. It's like, it's not just the game, right? It's a story behind the game. And in our case, what we're writing about, it's a story behind your product. What's your story? And how does the game, fit into that? And again, too, is like, also like our thought leadership isn't just on gamification. This is just as much as a product development book as it is a gamification book, because you can't do one thing well without doing the other thing well, right? You build it, you're a great product manager with poor gamification enablement, or if you're great at gamification and poor at product development, right? Like that's, it's not going to work unless you harness both those powers.
Yes. No, I fully agree with you. So looking from a product management perspective, you have two different main steps, right? You have the designing the strategy part, where I'm trying to understand the insights and the goals you mentioned, choosing which game mechanics works in the industry and the product and in the target segment I'm looking for, and creating that kind of user journey roadmap, and then putting that overarching strategy. And then you deep dive into the implementation part. So practical steps. How do I do a prototype? How do I prepare for the launch itself? How do I track the performance in order to make that kind of quick shifts? So if you're looking at strategy and if you're looking at implementation, 3 main points on strategy that are very critical and 3 main points on implementation that are also very critical. What would you recommend?
I mean, for me, the most important, like when you're getting to that point of implementation, is make sure that you have your data collection, your telemetry set up so that you can track what's going on. A lot of times you implement it and then it's one of those like, oh, well, we've got to wait 30 days to see how that affects conversion, or we wait for those numbers to roll in. Like those, you should be tracking every click, every view, everything to start to see immediately, like, hey, is this enacting change on day one? And build that into the implementation process. A lot of times it becomes a forethought where it's like, oh, well, we'll check it later down the road and see how it affects conversion. But I mean, I've worked on teams that have 7 product managers working on this thing. And it's sometimes kind of hard to say, okay, well, over the last 30 days, our conversion went up by 0.5%. Okay, well, which one of us was it? Like we all did we all had a test running. So who's going to get the credit for that test? And if you don't have that telemetry set up, if you don't have the tracking set up, it's really hard to be incredibly iterative on that. And so, I mean, that's the one bullet point I always give when you get to implementation is make sure that that's part of the process. Make sure that as you're writing your requirements, as you're building out the cards in your product management software, make sure those tasks are in there. Make sure that some developer is putting in that tracking implementation, because you're going to need it very, very quickly. You're going to need to be able to track on a daily basis, especially if you're tracking something like a daily average users or click views on an e-commerce site. Like those things move really, really fast. You've got to be able to react quicker than 15 or 30 days.
Yeah, just to add to that, like we literally have a whole chapter in the book called Selling Your Gamification Strategy, because throughout the 7 years I've been doing this, whenever I bring it up, there's automatic reaction like, oh, we're not including games, like that's childish, right? Or 100 other responses to gamification for people that don't understand it. Yet you go look at the academic journals, which we highlight in our book, like there's been proven statistical research studies about how gamification has improved healthcare, how gamification has improved education, how gamification improves HR, right? Like there's 100 statistics that we have in the book that prove gamification does help hit these goals and KPIs. But people will immediately sometimes brush it off. So you have to have a strategy. So when you have an idea for gamification, you have to build an argument about it. we take this into the pyramid principles, right? And we break it down and say, hey, go into your situation, to your boss, stakeholder, whoever it is, say like, we should do gamification to get our user engagement up 20%. And here's why. Argument one, I've done our research and our user base fit these personas that like this type of game. Argument two, the tech, we have this much available resources, what our engineers would be able to do it in this timeline. C, right? And you come in, with these arguments. And that's the first point. Craft your argument to leadership. Second point is know thy audience too, right? What does your boss want? What do the stakeholders want, right? If you go in being like, we want to increase user engagement by 20%, and they have no interest in that, they're like, nope, get out of here, right? If they're trying to hit financial metrics, right? And you could say like, hey, we're going to increase conversions 15%, and that's going to add another $600,000 to your bottom line this year. Gamification's magic, right? Gamify everything. Let's do it, right? So, we kind of turn it like the Dale Carnegie principle, like how to win friends and influence people, right? It's product management. I still believe is the core of it is emotional intelligence, right? You have to be able to lead and create relationships with people. So that includes your stakeholders and what their goals are. And once you do that, then you got to produce, right? So if you're going to go in and you're going to make these big bold statements, make sure that they're SMART goals too, right? Specific, measurable, actionable. Make sure you get there. Don't sell the golden goose if you can't deliver, because that's not going to end well, and it's going to continue to give a bad rap on gamification.
Oh, that's quite nice. So, if now we are looking more into the process part, because one of the things I've been seeing over the last few years in product development is that integrating something new for an organization inside the product development process is a tedious and quite difficult, specifically if you're following a waterfall, not an agile iterative process. So when you're talking physical goods, and I'm talking from my own experiences from appliances, the life cycle goes between 2 and 3 years for one product, which is quite extremely long. So doing kind of development 2 years ahead, how do you integrate such process of gamification inside the process itself? And how do we put the principle that from the ideation stage, once we're trying to find the pain points, build the jobs to be done, how do we integrate that mindset to find the insight of the gamification? What kind of mechanics would work with these consumers, with these pain points? And how do we verify that as we go inside the ideation, the concept development, the development part, pre-launch, and the launch itself?
Bret, can I start with foresight and the future type stuff first, and then kind of go into that? So, not in our book, but I think what was really compelling for me and helped shape my perspective of your question is that February and March, while we were putting together the framing of the book, right? I guess starting to write some overview of it, I did the Foresight Essentials at Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. And it really taught me about futurism and foresight, which changed my perspective on product development in general, but really enforcing that, if we're trying to solve problems that are happening today and we start building a product, we all know this from the digital and from the hardware, right? Yeah. You're at least 6 to 18 months out until your first prototype, right? Yes. So the problems that we're trying to solve today are going to be irrelevant by the time that we get the product out. So start thinking 3, 5, 10 years down the line. And this is an exercise that I've done with leadership teams and design thinking too, right? Is like, let's think ahead 10 years and what's the future going to hold, because that dictates what product that we're going to need by the time that it's released. So, I could send you that I just, after we wrote the book, I wrote an article for Institute for the Future, like for product managers, how to use foresight to have more success. Because we want first mover advantage, right? We want to be the first on an innovation. We want to be the open AIs and, I was thinking of social media examples. I'm not going to give any of them credit, but we'll just say we want to be the open AIs of the world, right? They're disrupting things. So
yes,
I think that's important. And then Bret, I'll let for the rest of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, it's ROI, right? It's return on investment, and that kind of becomes the king of everything. Like if you can show that there is a return on investment, that's where you can start building. Like that's where you can gain traction. That's where you can say, hey, if we invest this part, we can get this return. And obviously the return and the investments are wild cards sometimes. And
Yes, yes.
looking ahead can be the tricky part. But just like Mike said, like think about where this will be when you get to that point of release. When you're getting back to that return, where is this going to stand? Are users going to have this problem? What are the things that are going on here? And the investment side of things, don't be afraid to get creative there too. Like the investment is the one that we can change the most. Like that's the one that we have the most control over in ROI. Return is up to consumers. Like the consumers say what that return we get on is. But investment, we can use technologies to decrease our investment a little bit. We can spread things out and kind of build a portfolio where maybe we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. So our investment is maybe spread and a little safer across a few different things, and building those kinds of things into the investment side can help that longer term. I mean, you look at it just like you would your like
Yeah.
stock portfolio or something. You're not your stock portfolio, or I mean, hopefully your stock portfolio isn't a play on the next 30 days or 60 days.
Yes.
That's like a
Yes.
20, 30, 50-year play that you're looking at. Same
Yeah.
thing for products. Like we need to be looking ahead. Okay, what we're doing here is a 5, 10, 15-year play, or even on the shorter term, it's a 1, 2, 3-year play. And think about it from that standpoint. Like, what's the return we're going to get over the lifespan of whatever we're building? It's a longer than, hey, we're going to release this and the money's going to come in 1 month and it's going to be done. And that's our return on
No,
investment.
no.
That
Yeah.
return will spread time. And think about it that way. If we invest this, that return will come over time.
Yep. I thought about that for our book. It definitely did not happen.
So, so if we're now looking at two main points, right? So the future part, and I think this is a very interesting point because looking from different perspectives, it's true. You are developing now a product to go into the market within the next 1.5 to 2, 3 years. And if you are working on a solution that may become obsolete in the next period because either there's a disruptive technology or the enablers has changed or the landscape has completely shifted, right? But if you're trying to now discuss projection for the gamification concept itself 10 years ahead from now, what are the trends aside from OpenAI that you're seeing that, or from AI or generative AI itself, that you are seeing that are going to be impacting that? So generative AI is disrupting every single industry now in all aspects. But if we're trying to understand, are there some other drivers of change, upcoming trends that can actually be an outcome because generative AI? How would that look like?
Yeah. So in forecasting, we do an exercise called STEEP: social, technology, environment, economic, and policy. Right. So these are the five main sources that drivers of change influence. So when you think about like what social policies are going to change, gamification, we talked about, just the need for society to always be engaged, right? So take OpenAI out of it, just technology in general, right? I need more, more, more. I need content, like keep me busy, right? That's going to be a continual trend, right? Especially with generations. Like I didn't have my first cell phone until I was in college, right? And I
Yes.
would never text people because I wasn't gonna, like, the whole button's too confusing. Call them, right? Like it's different now. Like, my daughter's 2 and she knows how to work an iPad, right? Like it's like these generations grew up with technology.
Yes.
When you look
Yes.
at the technology part, different than OpenAI, Elon Musk is putting chips in people's, prototypes and brains now, right? There was an article or a concept that Institute did for the future. They said a day in a life of fully emergent technology. And it's a point of view as people are walking through and you're going into the grocery store and there's digital ads popping up like
Yes.
in your
Yes.
environment, right? And we're like, now we're living in a quasi technology world where, Bret, like, you got to think about AR. Like, yeah, AR has just as much as potential and danger as VR does, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Google
Yes.
Glass 2030, where everything's popping out. So like that technology will trend. I mean, and then there's a risk of over gamification, right?
Yeah.
Constantly being rated on what are you doing and what's your score. Almost like how Uber rates you as a passenger, right?
Yes.
It's like, oh dang, that one comment to that one Uber driver really crashed my score down. I'm a 4.6 now, right? So always you gotta be, which is, there's some good parts to that, but environment. So we talked about, one of the leading factors and possibly dangers of our generation is going to be climate change, right? Whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, yeah,
So, it doesn't matter what you think about it. The people that do want to change it will be doing things about it, right? So the environmental factor will play in to say, there's an example I used in a presentation of Honda or Toyota, one of the car companies. You have a driver score, right? In a hybrid car, it's like, how much gas do you use, or maybe it's an electric. How many miles did you go without needing to charge because you don't hit the accelerator hard and slam on the brakes, right? And you
yes,
get a driving score. So you're gamifying environmental practices, like hopefully being rewarded for recycling. In Michigan, you get money back when you recycle, right? I mean, there are some of these plays that are already in. Um, Economic is, I think you could look at how you could save money by gamification, right? The Starbucks, the rewards, things like that. And then policy, what Bret mentioned about privacy. As privacy laws change, so will the ability to get user data, and that depends how we make games. So there's a lot of different drivers of change throughout these 5 areas that will dictate, right, what the future of gamification looks like.
Um, I mean, I'm a the some of the like social scores and that honestly like scare me to death. Like I'm a fan of Black Mirror and I watch those episodes and every single episode I'm like, yep, this is real, this could happen and this is terrifying. And so honestly like that's why I like to me like that all centers around those like points, badges, leaderboards. Like if that's the way we view gamification and society and say, hey, these are the things we do to increase engagement, that's where we're headed. Like if that's how people adopt it and what we think the end all of engagement is a point, a badge, a leaderboard, they can be scary. Like that's where we're headed. And so trying to go those like not necessarily other directions, but look at these other mechanics. Like Mike said, storytelling. Like storytelling is an incredibly underutilized game mechanic in product development. Like we very rarely tell stories. Like Duolingo, I think, does it well. Like they kind of like set you up to say like, hey, you're learning this language and there's a narrative behind learning this language. We have things like Habitica is another great example where we can get into the storytelling of doing things. And so trying to capture those other types of mechanics outside of points and badges and leaderboards are crucial to me, because if we get into just those sorts of aspects, that's kind of the direction we start heading. You build one of my favorite things in game design is emergent behavior. And it's the idea of someone using a system for something other than its intended purpose. But like if you get to like Uber's a perfect example, like you start looking at people's Uber scores as like hiring decisions or something like that, where you're starting to use like, hey, this is information about a person and we're using it for something other than its intended purpose, can be incredibly dangerous. It can be a very like frightening area that we start to get into. And so, I mean, games have this for good. You look at a Minecraft and people are using Minecraft for all sorts of stuff besides just playing a game. But our
yeah,
products can start to do the same thing. Like we can start to have this sort of crossbreeding of what game mechanics we've built being used for something other than its intended purpose. And we need to consider that as we move into the future, because it is data. And I mean, we talked about privacy. Like if we start tying these game things to real people things, it can be a little bit frightening, like
yeah,
in the long term of things.
yeah, yeah. This is quite insightful. So now, a few last points. So if you have an organization that's actually, after listening to all this great information, is still hesitant about gamification into their products or their process, so I want to have an advice from each of you. What would be your top advice to them? Because I think after hearing all of this information, all this research, the data inside the book, and everything that's happening around us, I wouldn't, for me at least, I wouldn't think of an organization that would be hesitant to apply. But if there's still one, what would be your top advice?
Besides, I'd say, like, really think about what's in it for them, right? Like, and really structuring your argument to what they want to do. Uh, Leverage the statistics there too. Like, show what's proven, and don't do anything erratic. Like, don't bet your job on gamification or anything like that. But and sometimes you're not going to get every opportunity, right? And they might say like, no, we're not going to do this because whatever happened in that person's life that hates games, right? Because they're just an angry person that wants to be a pain in the butt, right? So if that's them, like, don't get discouraged. Don't think that everyone's going to have that view on gamification, right? Continue to read about it. Continue to play games, learn about it. Maybe create your own products on the side. When we built our website on Wix, we picked Wix because it has gamification in the website builder. You could do badges and
Nice.
points and leaderboards and stuff
Wow.
like that. So create a website on Wix, right? And gamify an experience for yourself. Don't let one person say no and discourage you from doing this, because that person obviously doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, the one thing I always hear is, well, gamification is just a fad, or games are just a fad. Well, like, I mean, the numbers speak. Like, games are a $200 billion industry. That's larger than music. That's larger than movies. That's larger than books combined. Like, when we talk about how people consume media, games blow the other three out of the water. So if they're worried that games are just a fad, games are going away, they're just for kids in their basement, no, it's a $200 billion industry. Us as humans love games. We love to play, we love to socialize. And if it's not games, like, look at sports. Like, sports is one of the largest industries in the entire world. And, like, I hate to break it to you, but sports are games. Like, that's what it is at its core. They're not video games, but, like, it's all games. They're all around us and we don't think about it. And sometimes, like, just speaking to it in that fashion and say, like, hey, this isn't a fad. This isn't a trend. These are industries that are making billions of dollars. And those billions of dollars are there because consumers enjoy this experience. It's not a commodity that, like, oh, it's making billions of dollars because we have to pay our electric bill, we have to pay our water. No, these are things that people pay because they enjoy. And our products can be the same. Like, the products we build can have that same enjoyment, that same engagement, where people want to use the product. They enjoy it and it's fun and it becomes part of their life. And when you speak about them in that way, when you speak about them as an industry, I think a lot of that talk about it being a fad, about it being a trend, starts to fall by the wayside. Like, trends don't make $200 billion a year. Fads don't make $200 billion a year and grow. That's the other thing, is it's the only industry in the entertainment sector growing over the last decade. It's the only one that has consistent growth year over year for the last 10 years. Books, movies, music don't have that. They've reached kind of a plateau on what they make. Games are still growing. Like, it's year over year growth. And the people that played games when they were kids are now becoming adults and they're spending money and they're getting their kids playing games, and the industry is only going to get larger.
And then I didn't
Yeah.
find this out till writing the book with Bret. So we should have created a game together, not actually a book. But you know what? We're like 3 or 4 chapters in already. So we're like, you know what? We started it. We got to finish it.
That's quite good. No, frankly speaking, I think as a product manager, I think this book is going to be an excellent addition to my library. So I'm going to head
Thank you.
out and buy this one, because I think all the information we've been discussing so far is quite mind blowing. But a few things at the end. So based on all of this, do you guys hold gamification preparation workshops either for individuals, organizations, any sort of certification you want to announce about?
Yeah, sure. So, we created a certification, so product management gamification on our website. If users or if anyone wants to do it for free that listen to your podcast, reach out to us, say that you listen to Mike and Bret on Steve's podcast, and we'll give you a code to do it for free. Besides that, yeah, we have opportunities for either like career coaching. We've done some presentations like how to level up your product career, right? How to gamify your career to be able to get the skills and experience that you need to make it to that next level, whatever your goal is. We're open. We talked to a couple of international corporations about doing some gamification workshops too. And there's different formats, right? There's kind of like a 2-hour overview with some light games to a 3-day session to where we really dive in and we go through and we build a prototype of a gamified product and things like that. So there's a ton of ways that you could interact with us. Check out the book, our services, everything else at www.levelupyourproduct.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. Our book is on Amazon, Gamification for Product Excellence. I think that is it. One thing we forgot about. We gamified our own book, which I haven't seen anyone else do. So there's actually, the book is like a treasure map. So if you find some inconsistencies in the book, put the puzzle together, then go on our website, enter the secret code, and it unlocks a bunch of rewards and treasures for you as well.
That's
I
quite
agree with
amazing.
I think that's the most exciting part about our book is that we gamified it and we put together some really cool rewards for figuring out the code. So
Yeah.
there's
For
that.
everyone who's listening, you're going to find all the links for everything that Mike mentioned now inside the podcast. So make sure that you check it out. And I think one key important aspect, because as you know, everyone knows today, the economy is going downside everywhere across every industry. So I want to use this golden opportunity when I have you both guys on the podcast.
Mm.
What's the best way that you can use gamification in these kind of conditions? Because I think trying to use a tool to the best purpose of a company in such conditions is going to be of great benefit.
Yeah, I mean, let me start with rewards, because a lot of the edits I went through as I read the first couple of versions of our book, I went back and I changed examples of rewards. So we don't have big budgets, right? And people are cutting back on things. So being able to give financial rewards or significant time off or things like that, right? We don't have the opportunity. So there's a couple different games that I do. Like we're not just gamifying products. And we didn't talk about a lot about this, but in the book we have a chapter on like gamifying product development processes, which is if you do gamify product or not, you can still gamify the processes that you work to be more efficient and get more out of your team, right? So in this economy, like do that, right? Every leader is looking for more efficient teams that provide more value, right? Gamify it, make work more fun, bring the value of your team up, right? Because you enjoy working together because your processes are more fun. What I was going to get to, like that, rewards in general don't have to be financial. We did a like bug hunter, right? We did a sprint where we're just focused on we got to get rid of all the bugs, and whoever gets rid of the most bugs gets a funny T-shirt that says exterminator on it, right? Because they're a bug exterminator, and that T-shirt costs $14, right? Or we do a data detective exercise with our product team. We give everyone access to Google Analytics. Say it's like a design sprint but for data. So you go in and go through all the data, find correlations, bring insights from the data, and whoever's gets the voted on best insights gets a little data detective badge, right? Like there are little things that you can do, that cost minimal amounts of money, right? Like, so when you're thinking about rewards, either internally or externally, look at the different types of rewards. It doesn't have to be financial. Sometimes it's social. Maybe one of your employees or one of your customers gets to go out to lunch with you, right? Say like whoever wins will take you out to lunch, or
Yeah, yeah.
internally it's like, hey, you're going to get lunch with the VP of product if you do these things. Like think about the social aspects of rewards and not just the financial, and that will help you kind of weather these economic times when people are uncertain about the economy. They're less willing to spend money. So think about creative ways to enact gamification to both increase your efficiency and have variable rewards that don't hurt your bottom line.
And I mean, within products, like the stickiness and that engagement is one of the key things that gamification can help with. I mean, look at a Duolingo, look at the streaks in Duolingo. And during an economic downturn, like that's what you want. You need people to stick with your product through that economic downturn. And then when things come back around, then you can get them spending money again. And using some of those freemium models that games introduced and software has started to adopt, those models allow people to continue keeping a streak alive, or earn badges, or share with their friends any more than they can. Will keep them through that economic downturn, and will keep them using, because that's what you don't want, is that churn. Like if you lose people during the economic downturn, it's significantly harder to earn them back. But gamification, those mechanics and the things that we use there, that psychology, is a great way to just keep people involved through that downturn. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're spending money on it, but they're sticking with you. They're sticking with you through these times. And then when the times turn around, they're there still. You don't have to put out a marketing effort after that economic downturn to try to get everyone back. Use that gamification, and not even necessarily spending money, just keeping a streak alive, or keeping them earning badges, or some type of reward that's a free reward to you, but gives them some level of emotional value, helps with those times. It helps just keep them there so that they're not turning off a subscription and possibly not bringing it back. Move to those models where what you can offer for a low cost to you, but a high cost to them is valuable. And it can kind of help guide you through that downturn.
And that's very, very insightful. All right, guys, we are almost at the end of the episode here. So any last words from any of you guys before we close the episode?
Well, we definitely have some ideas for gamification in your industry, right? So whenever you want to chat about how we could work together to gamify appliances, let me know. I have ideas for fridges, washing machines, especially dryers, right? So
that's nice.
No,
that'll be very interesting.
We appreciate you inviting us on here. This is a great, incredible questions. Very thought-provoking discussion. We appreciate your time and your hospitality. Glad to be your first video podcast too.
That's quite amazing. Yeah, no, thanks a lot for you guys both. I think this is one of the best episodes I've produced so far. I think the concept is, I've been in product management for several years, but the understanding and the depth of the discussion here, and how can this actually start intriguing several ideas in different landscapes, is of great value. So I think for any product manager listening on the line here, if you don't know about gamification, buy the book, understand more, and try to use that not just in creating the product, but at the same time in your internal processes so that you can get more out of your team as well.
Cool.
Well, thanks a lot for tuning in, and thank you guys, and we're out. Hi everyone. If you like the episode and would like to follow up on the next episodes, please subscribe on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, or Spotify, or in any other application you're following up the podcast on. And if you like the episode, please share it. This was Saif Abdel Ghani, Product Innovation Expert, Podcaster, and PDMA Egypt Chapter Leader.